So in today's podcast, we are going to talk about how I went from small town Salt Lake City, Utah, to New York City, New York, to become a hairstylist to the rich and famous. Now, it was not originally in my plan to become a hairstylist. My dad once sat me down when I was in high school and asked me what I wanted to do after I graduated from high school. And I told him that I wanted to go to the University of Utah and play football. That's what I wanted. Now, I didn't say I wanted to go to the University of Utah to study, economics or architecture or be a doctor or anything like that. Because I didn't know what I wanted to be. I just know what I wanted to do. And what I wanted to do was go and play football for the University of Utah. Now, my dad had different ideas for me. So my father was a hairstylist, a salon owner himself, and he shared with me that he wanted me to follow his footsteps. Now, my dad's from Japan, and so the Japanese culture is a very kind of controlling culture in that it's more of like, hey, I want you to do this, and you're going to go do it, versus, hey, what do you want to do? And maybe it's becoming more flexible as generations become more Americanized. But my dad was born and raised in Japan, came here to America, and basically was had my future planned out for me, whether I wanted it or not. And so what he proposed is, he said, why don't we do this? You could go to the University of Utah and maybe try and play football, but why don't we do this? Why don't I send you to London, England, to go to hair school at the Vidal Sassoon Academy. And then after you spend a year in London at the academy, we will send you, we meaning my mother and my father, my parents, will send me to New York City to basically practice my craft that I would have learned while out in London. And so I started to kind of think about it, and I was like, wow, that sounds pretty cool. Okay, so I could go live in London at the age of 18. London, England. I was born and raised in Salt Lake City. Man, that sounded amazing. And then from London, England, my dad would ship me out to New York City to basically become a hairstylist. And so that is the path. That's how it started. That's how it began. But the reality is there was so much more to it to become where I became as far as a hairstylist to the rich and famous in New York City. You could move to New York and never have a whole lot of success. It was the path that I took, which again was not my path that I had created. It was the path I took, but it was the path my dad created. Having already been a hairstylist for decades and decades and decades, he knew the path to least resistance to get me to where, I guess his goal of where he wanted me to be was. And so basically what happened is I went to hair school out in London. Now, you don't have to go to hair school. If you're listening to this and you have a dream to work in the fashion industry in New York City, and you live in, I don't know, Utah, Nebraska, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, wherever, Arizona, Ohio, somewhere where it's not New York, basically, and you have a dream that you want to go to the iconic city for fashion, whether it's to do hair, whether it's to fashion design, whatever it may be, you obviously don't have to go to London to go to school. My dad wanted me to go to the Vidal Sassoon Academy, which at that time was arguably the best hair school in the world. There was an academy also in Los Angeles. I guess I could have gone there. But there was a prestige about going to London, England to learn from the Vidal Sassoon Academy there. Vidal Sassoon is an English company. And so he sent me out there. Now, the reality is, after I came back to the States and went to New York City, where I worked at Vidal Sassoon, that education that I got in London wasn't completely really that relevant. I could have gone anywhere to hair school. I could have gone to hair school here in Salt Lake City and still gone to New York and pursued what I pursued. So when you go work at a high-end salon on Fifth Avenue in New York City, to the rich and famous, you're going to have to go through an apprenticeship. My apprenticeship was 2 years long. 2! whether I'd gone to the Vidal Sassoon Academy in London or whether I'd gone to some hair school here in Salt Lake City, I still had to do that 2-year apprenticeship in New York City. So, like I said, you don't have to necessarily go to the greatest school. You just have to be licensed. So once I got my license, it was from that point that I could then get a job at the Vidal Sassoon salon in New York. Now, I remember making the phone call while in Salt Lake City. So I'd gone to London already, graduated from the hair school, came back to Salt Lake, and I actually had to go to hair school here in Salt Lake for, I think it was about 600 more hours. I needed 2,000 hours to get my Utah cosmetology license. And I knew I was going to go to New York anyway, but I thought, hey, I might as well get my Utah cosmetology license because at the time, Utah was home. I'd gone to London for a year, came back home to Utah, went to a beauty school here in Salt Lake for 600 more hours. And then at that point, once I was licensed, I called the Vidal Sassoon manager on 5th Avenue, 58th and 5th, in the GM building. Same building as the FAO Schwartz toy store. So if you've been to New York City and you know the toy store, we were just in that same building on the concourse level, just one level down. And I called my manager, it wasn't my manager at the time, I called the manager, and I said, hi, my name's Yoshi Shiraki. I would love to come work for you. I'm in Salt Lake City. I was wondering if I could schedule a job interview. And he was like, sure. Like, are you going to fly out here for the job interview? Because there was no such thing as Zoom back in 1993, right? This was 1993. And so there was no FaceTime, no Zoom call, no nothing. So he's like, are you going to fly out here? I said, yeah, I'll come. You know, just let me know when it works for you. And he basically shared with me the best day to do a job interview. And so I got on a plane and got a hotel for, I think it was one night, literally landed, spent the night. No, it was 2 nights. It was 2 nights. Got on the plane, flew out to New York, landed, spent the night, woke up the next morning, went and did the job interview, then went back to the hotel, spent the night, and flew back to Salt Lake City. And the manager, interviewed me, and I had, zero work experience. I just graduated from hair school. And so I was far from a seasoned hairstylist. Now, some of the people that go through the apprentice program at Vidal Sassoon were seasoned hairstylists. They'd been working as hairstylists for a while. They just never were Sassoon trained. They wanted to get that Sassoon training, so they wanted to go through the Sassoon program and become a Sassoon hairstylist. And I was definitely not that guy. I was fresh from beauty school, cosmetology school. So what he shared with me after, basically after the interview was over, he said, congratulations, you've got the job. What are you going to do now? I said, well, I'm going to go home and pack. He says, well, when do you think you can be out here? I said, I don't know, like 2 weeks. And he's like, perfect, come back in 2 weeks. And we picked a day, and I had to fly home and pack and then turn around and fly back and find an apartment and all of that stuff. Luckily, I had parents that were able to help me with that process on finding an apartment and all of that good stuff because I was only 19. I was 19 at the time. I was only 19 years old. I'd lived in London at the age of 18, and I was only 19 when I was living in New York. And so when I moved to New York. So basically, when I got out there 2 weeks later and started working, the manager had shared with me that one of the reasons he decided he would hire me is because of my ambition and willingness to fly out to New York City just for a job interview. He said, if you're willing to come this far just for the interview, I could see that you were driven and you had, ambition to do well. So fast forward 2 weeks, moved to New York, got an apartment, and went to my first day of work. Now, here's the hiccup that I ran into. I had the state of Utah had issued me a cosmetology license. I had a Utah license, but I did not have a New York license. So in order to actually act as an apprentice at the salon, meaning that whether it was to shampoo clients or blow dry clients, basically to service clients, you have to actually be licensed in that state. And I was only licensed in Utah. So I had to go through a process where I got reciprocity in New York. Now, the way it worked is I could have gone to the New York state board and taken the test and, got licensed that way. But what other stylists before me who had moved to New York to pursue hairstyling in the mecca of fashion in New York City, luckily shared with me that I just had to find a state that had reciprocity with New York and Utah. And that state, I believe, if I remember correctly, was Virginia. So with a Utah license, I could get a Virginia license without actually having to take the test. It just, Virginia honored a Utah license. So what I did is I filled out the application and basically got a Virginia license. Well, then Virginia and New York had reciprocity. So I filled out the application as a New Yorker now and got a Virginia license. And so that's how I was able to get my New York license. So hey, if you're licensed somewhere and you're thinking, man, I don't want to move because I don't want to have to take the state test again to get licensed in another state, just figure out what states have reciprocity with one another, and then you can potentially avoid having to take another test. So anyways, I was taught that back when I was 19 in 1993, and that's how I got licensed in New York. Now that process took, by the time I got the reciprocity, now this was, again, 1993, it was a lot slower. It was about 6 months of that process where I had to wait for my Virginia license, and then, I don't know, that was maybe 3 months of waiting, and then 3 months to get it to New York. So for 6 months, I was an apprentice at Vidal Sassoon, but could not cut hair, blow dry hair, shampoo hair, couldn't do anything. So my training was nothing. I wasn't getting trained. So all I could do was sweep the floor. Anytime a stylist finished a haircut, I'd sweep the floor, or I would serve coffee or tea. Or, like run errands, like whenever we needed more soda, I'd run to the grocery store because we'd serve soda to the clients. Or when shipments of products would come in, I would, meet the big, huge freight truck, semi-truck on Fifth Avenue and help him carry the boxes down into the salon. I mean, I did grunt work primarily because I couldn't do hair. I didn't have a New York license. So for 6 months, I was just basically an apprentice where I could watch these stylists, these fantastic stylists that were cutting hair in Vidal Sassoon on Fifth Avenue and see how they were doing it, but I couldn't actually participate until I got my New York license, which took 6 months. Then after that, my apprentice program was 2 years. So I was an apprentice for 2.5 years in New York City, or at Vidal Sassoon in New York City. So once I became a stylist, it was so rewarding for me because you have to go through a series of tests, at least back then. I'm not sure how it's run now, Vidal Sassoon, but back then you had to go through a series of tests and you had to do a soiree and you had to do a bunch of models, and if you failed any haircut 3 times, you were fired. Basically, you got to, like, for instance, the bob, the one-length trim, the firefly, disheveled elegance, graduated bob, square layers, whatever it was. There were so many different haircuts you had to test along those 2 years that you were an apprentice. And if you failed a haircut, you got to do it again, but you only got 3 times, 3 chances. And after the 3rd chance, if you still failed, even if you were a wonderful individual, unfortunately, they'd let you go. That was just the policy back then, and maybe it's still now. I have no idea. That was a long time ago. So when I finally passed my final exam and was granted to be a stylist at Vidal Sassoon on Fifth Avenue in New York City as a small town kid from Salt Lake City, as you can imagine, who had to do an apprentice program for 2.5 years, probably to this day, if I had to guess, I bet you in all of Vidal Sassoon history, in all of the company's history, I probably was the longest apprentice in history of Vidal Sassoon. Most people did not take 2.5 years. And again, I had to do the first 6 months without touching any hair because I was waiting for my license to happen. So I probably hold the record, which is not a good record, but I probably hold the record for the longest apprentice in Vidal Sassoon history. I wonder if anyone's done it longer. Actually, there's a Vidal Sassoon Facebook page. Maybe I'll go post on there to see if anybody has been an apprentice longer. So I hold a record, potentially hold a record for Vidal Sassoon. It's not a good record. I'd rather have the fastest apprentice program. To the best of my knowledge, it was a gentleman who was the art director who had been a stylist for years and years, and then decided he wanted to get trained the Sassoon way. But he had tons of good experience as a hairstylist, so he kind of just went through the process quicker than the average person. But like I said, he just passed those tests faster. But like I said, typically it's a 2-year program. Most people take 2 years. I took 2.5. So anyways, it was at that point where I got my introduction now, where I was cutting hair to these elite individuals, high-end fashion elite individuals coming into the salon. You know, the rich and the famous, the Jerry Seinfelds were coming in, the Chevy Chases, the Chuck Mangiones. I mean, the list goes on, right, of people that were clients of the Vidal Sassoon on 5th Avenue. And right there on 58th and 5th, because I keep saying 5th Avenue. I want to be clear, there were 2 5th Avenue locations at the time. Vidal Sassoon had a salon on 14th Street and 5th Avenue, and I was on the one on 58th Street and 5th Avenue. So they were both on 5th Avenue, which means if you know anything about New York City, 5th Avenue is like the Rodeo Drive of Beverly Hills. 5th Avenue is where you're going to find Prada and Gucci and all of the high-end shopping, the expensive, fashion clothing that you're going to, the expensive clothing and fashion that you're going to purchase. It's all on 5th Avenue. And so it was quite prestigious to be able to finally become a hairstylist on 5th Avenue, where I started to get these clients who would come in and built that clientele. And basically, it was a long road, 2 years of cosmetology school, because in the state of Utah, back up here, 2,000 hours was approximately 2 years, if I remember correct. No, it was actually... for whatever, so it was about 1.5 years of cosmetology school, if I'm remembering this correctly, because I did about a year in London, came back, did about another 6 months, then in a 2.5-year apprentice program. And so there's a lot of waiting before you actually make it into becoming a stylist. Now, when I talk about making it, I was just, when you just become a stylist, you're a junior stylist, which is, hey, it's a lot better than being an assistant, an apprentice, and you work your way up the ladder from there. But for me, there was a lot of waiting a lot of patience that had to be tapped into to just become that junior stylist. But it was so rewarding because, again, once you become a junior stylist, that's when you actually start to make money. As an assistant at Vidal Sassoon in that 2-year apprentice, you were basically, and I don't know if it's any better today, but it was minimum wage and tips. So I made minimum wage for 2.5 years in New York City with any tips that I got for shampooing or blow drying somebody's hair. I couldn't cut until I became a stylist, but I could blow dry and shampoo those 2 years. The first 6 months was just minimum wage because I wasn't getting any tips for sweeping the floor or serving coffee. So it was a lot of patience, a long road that had to be had before I was finally, like I said, a stylist in New York City. So that is my path on how I became a stylist at Vidal Sassoon, which then led to becoming a stylist to the rich and famous. Once I was a stylist on 5th Avenue, those were the types of clients that would come into the salon, and that's how you start to build your clientele of those types of individuals. So I wanted to share this story because I get asked a lot, hey, you're from Utah, right? How did you cut hair in New York? Well, I now live back in Utah again, and I flip homes for a living. One of the beautiful things that I found with cutting hair is I loved the creativity of transforming a haircut, doing a makeover into something amazing, something pretty. Well, that translates really well with houses as well. You buy an ugly house, and you fix it up, and you turn around and you flip it. That transformation of ugly to beautiful, whether it's hair, whether it's houses, is still just as fun. And so a lot of people are like, well, did you actually live in New York City? Because you live in Utah, right? Well, yes, I did live in New York City for 20 years. I grew up in Salt Lake, moved to New York City, and then moved back where I am now in Utah again, flipping houses, as a living, and I still love to cut hair, which is why I do these videos, these tutorial videos. 2 decades of high-end hair fashion. You know, I did hair for magazines. I did hair for runway shows on Fashion Week in New York City. I mean, I got to live the pinnacle of the fashion world in the United States, being a small town kid from Salt Lake City. So I share that again because if you are watching this video and I don't know where you're from, maybe you live in Asia, maybe you live in Canada, who knows where you live, maybe you live in mid-America somewhere, and you have a dream to work in the fashion industry and high-end fashion. Of course, there's, you know, not just New York City, there's London, there's Paris. I mean, there's many places, but if your dream is to go to one of these places, and maybe you live in the US and it's to go to New York, you know, go for it. Go for it. I mean, there's a lot of patience that will need to be tapped into. You're not just gonna, even if you're talented, show up in New York City and get to work these fashion shows. You're gonna have to kind of build your name, right? And these photo shoots that I did and these fashion shows, these runway shows, it wasn't just the minute I became a stylist I was doing those, but from becoming a stylist, I was able to build my name, and from building my name, I got invited to do these things, and it was amazing. It was an absolute amazing experience. You know, and now I've moved back to Salt Lake City, so I didn't want to have to build my clientele again. When I moved from New York City back to Salt Lake City, I realized that I was going to lose my entire hair clientele. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to have to start all over and build a new clientele, then I'm just going to start over in something maybe that I've never tried, or, you know, something different. How about that? Something to see if I like it. And my wife and I had flipped a house, and we had some rentals that we had purchased during the time I was actually a hairstylist. I've always liked the idea of building real estate. I've always loved the idea of, you know, flipping houses. And we'd done some while I was still a hairstylist. So when we moved to Utah, and I thought, okay, I can either start all over and try and build a clientele here in Salt Lake City, or I can just start over in something new. And we had already gotten our feet wet in the real estate game, so we just decided to take a chance and see how we did at real estate. And, you know, we haven't looked back. It's been great because now that's, you know, what we primarily do is we fix and flip houses, and also a licensed real estate agent. So I had to start over in something, whether it was to build a new clientele. I figured I'd just start over in real estate because I was enjoying it. So but like I said, still cut hair. Obviously, these videos, I'm doing these videos because I really do enjoy the artistic side of cutting hair. Really like it. I love fashion. I love the fashion industry. And that is something that I do miss, is not being involved in the fashion industry anymore. Living in Salt Lake City, living in New York, I was involved in the fashion industry. Here I'm obviously not even involved in the fashion industry. I do these haircut tutorials and I flip houses. So I do miss that, you know, being involved in that. But nonetheless, I also really have to say I do absolutely love flipping houses, remodeling homes. Again, it's just so fun to take, whether it's, like I said, a bad haircut or a bad house, and make it beautiful. So if you guys have any questions, hey, please feel free to put them down in the comment section below. Would love to help in any way I can. For some of you who are maybe thinking about taking that risk and moving out to New York City, San Francisco, wherever it may be, to pursue something bigger, pursue the fashion industry, whatever it is, feel free to reach out. I don't know if I'll have the answer, but I'd love to help in any way I can. And if you like this video, hey, please don't forget to give me a thumbs up. And I want to thank you guys for watching. I want to thank you guys for your support on my channel. And I hope you guys really enjoy the content. And I'll see you guys on the next video.